especially with like him wanting to have discussions on the video.
All right.
There to talk about it.
So left off last class. There we go. Talking about price discrimination. So this kind of introduced the idea of what we're trying to do or what the price discrimination means. It's all we're just trying to charge different people different prices. So all the models we kind of looked at and when we did the last class, there were single price models. Like I said, a single price for these tickets, right? It's probably more likely, right, that we're going to want to use different pricing strategies if we're really trying to maximize profits, right? Because it's choosing a single price, right? We know that we're going to be leaving a lot of surplus out there. And so we can kind of look at some different models as to see what's going on here. So the first that we'll use is just variable ticket price. And this should make a lot of sense, right? So if I think about, if I've got, I don't know, think about baseball, it's like 82 games, right? And I just want to set a single price for my tickets. I'd actually be looking at demand across every single game, right? But I know that for some games, demand is going to be significantly higher. Well, I guess I could put these on the same one. It's going to be significantly higher than demand for other games, right? I think about like I have some capacity. I think about I'm choosing different prices, right? So all variable ticket pricing means is that we're going to try to evaluate every single game based off its characteristics and just charge different prices for those games, right? So, this isn't crazy, right? It's just that we're saying, hey, look, if I set a single price for these tickets for every game, I'm going to be losing out on money because for some of those games, I could be, consumers are willing to pay higher prices, but then also for some of them, I'm not selling any tickets because nobody, the optimal price was far below whatever I was setting this single price to be. So all they're going to go, you can think about, you want to go on StubHub right now, you could like prove yourself to you that this is what they're doing. If you look at like weekend versus weekday games, if you look at like when you have higher quality opponents, any characteristic that we would think would drive up the demand curve, we'll see that there's different prices, right? And if that's even, not even on StubHub, but if they're being sold directly from the team, they're going to charge different prices for games they think that there's going to be a higher demand for. All that is variable ticket pricing, right? So it's kind of a fancy name for basically using what the demand curve for the actual game being played is, and then kind of basing every single game's price differently. There's some other examples that are kind of interesting. If you look at different types of seats as well, this could be, we're kind of assuming that we're looking at the exact same seats. So like either general seating or maybe we're just looking at local seats. But the NHL, some of these teams have like gold, silver, bronze games. So like they know that, or they think going into the season that these are going to be higher quality opponents, or they think that, these are weekend games where they should be able to set the price higher. So they actually even like break it up for the consumer to know like, here's the basic different level of demand that we think each one of these games falls in, right? College, if you look at college games, especially basketball, you kind of look at ticket pricing across like winter break where they know demand is going to be significantly lower. You typically see the kind of price for those games is much lower than the price for games when, the students are back and the kind of, not around the holidays and things like that. So that's nothing crazy, right? That's very similar to what we're going to talk about next. So variable ticket pricing is done prior to the season, right? So this is when we're selling tickets prior to the season occurring. Right? Once the season occurs, right, things can change, right? So maybe I thought I could get away with charging $50 a ticket for whatever game I'm selling tickets to. My star players go down. I now have much lower demand for my games. So instead of continuing to charge 50, I know that demand has shifted down. I should lower my prices, right? So dynamic ticket pricing is the same idea of variable ticket pricing. We're still responding to demand changes. It's just that we're doing it in real time, right? Variable ticket pricing was done prior to it based off of expectations. Dynamic means that we're changing as the season progresses, right? So you can kind of think about, why this would matter. I kind of already mentioned like injuries, but also if you have like unexpectedly good rookies. So you have, going into the season, I thought, I'm only going to be able to get away with charging $50 for a ticket. Then once I see I have these good young players, well, maybe now I start to be able to charge 100, right? I know the demand for my game is going to be significantly higher. Right? So it's, a lot more popular in long, if I had a longer season, right? It's a lot more popular. Like I said, maybe in the NFL, we could argue that dynamic ticket price would make a lot more sense because there's so many injuries, right? And demand for the games from those injuries could shift dramatically throughout the season. Good. Go off a little bit here. So, what's one reason why dynamic ticket pricing? So, if I'm being told this the first time, I'm thinking like, well, yeah, why don't I just do dynamic ticket pricing and just always respond to, changing circumstances? So why could it be valuable to use variable ticket pricing instead? So let's think about, we're looking at some game. We've got this capacity. Even if they act like a monopolist, we've got demand, marginal revenue. Going into the season, actually, let's call this like before the season, right? So we'll use a B there. Before the season, for this game, right, given whatever the conditions and the factors were going in that season, demand was predicted or expected to be that high, right? So if I charge this price, right, there are going to be some consumers at the beginning of the season who will purchase these tickets, right? I'll sell out my stadium and I'll be able to get this price, right? What happens, right? So that's if I get people to buy tickets before the season. Well, now let's say my star player gets injured and demand has significantly now for all my games, but even for this game specifically, has now fallen. And kind of think about, well, now, right? Everyone who bought a ticket before, right, would no longer pay that higher price, right? So going into it, if I can sell more tickets, if bad things happen, well, if I adjust this using dynamic ticket pricing after those bad things happens, I'd be selling these tickets at a much lower price. Right? So it's advantageous to be able to sell prior to the season if you end up having some of these bad things occur, right? Because this demand curve is solely based off expectations, right? So they would be built off like the average or I guess not the average necessarily, but take the probability that the star player gets injured times how much revenue you could expect. Add to that the probability that your star players don't get injured times the revenue you expect. We're building an expectation, right? Once the bad things actually occur, oh man, really wish I would have used variable pricing instead of dynamic ticket pricing. Now, good things occur, the opposite happens, right? Let's say something good occurs before the season. I was setting the price here. Now you can imagine if I had more things which I can make. I should have done this weeks ago. So it would just be like if good things occur, well, now using dynamic ticket pricing would make more sense, right? But we can't really know going into the season whether or not we would be kind of, if we're going to end up experiencing good or kind of bad things throughout the season. So if we expect, let's say, we think as a team, I think I know that I have better players than what they're being ranked, right? So I know that based off of what people think, my demand curve is probably lower than what it should be, right? Well, then if I'm expecting to have a lot of these good things, which is that everyone else starts realizing these players are really good and highly ranked as well, well, then maybe I hold off and try to, sell fewer tickets going into the season with variable ticket pricing and rely more on dynamic ticket pricing as the season goes on. Any questions on this? It's hopefully making some sense. So this one's pretty easy, but we can also think about another price strategy. So as opposed to setting a single price for tickets, right? This is always going to be kind of our reference, right? What's another way we can price discriminate? So sometimes we'll see teams sell tickets in blocks, right? I don't just mean like 4 tickets for the same game, but multiple different games, right? So you can buy 1 ticket for 4 games as a package, right? So why might that be profitable? Well, if I took a more attractive game where I know demand is higher and subsequently the price I could get away with charging is higher, and I take a less attractive game, kind of combine those together, I know that, well, if they want to go to this higher quality game, they're also going to have to buy this package to get a ticket to the lower quality game as well. then maybe I can make a little bit more money. So I'll give you kind of the example. Let's say, we've got, I think I probably use did I use White Sox or something here? There we go. So I'll do, let's say we've got some capacity and this is demand, marginal revenue. And then we'll do this over here, much lower demand. Maybe we can't even hit capacity. Yeah. Let's say for the second one, we're getting much lower price, right? So if I set the price at 50, right? How many tickets am I going to sell to these two? Or if I set the price at 50, right? So maybe it's something even like this. I might not sell any tickets to that one game. Now, for this game, I know people would be willing to pay up to $75, so I'll still sell out, right? You can think about how much am I making across the two games if I charge a single price of 50. Well, I know that people are only going to choose to go to that really high quality or that good game where demand is higher, right? If I package these games together, I know I could charge consumers up to the combination of whatever those optimal pricing strategies would be in each game. So instead of a single price selling one ticket at $50, I could package these together, right? I know people would be willing to pay up to $100 for that package, right? And now my revenue is twice as high, right? Even twice as high if instead, let's say I even just set the price at 75. Well, it still would only sell to this one game. Nobody would choose to go to the other game. And so I'm still increasing my revenues, even if I'm able to kind of accurately choose this optimal price of 75. So you'll see kind of, there's various examples of this. I know that colleges like to use it a lot because there's a bigger quality gap in between some of the games. So they'll package I know for a while, if you wanted to do for the Purdue IU game, you also had to buy tickets to New Jersey Institute of Technology games as well as, so they package these high low quality games, making sure they're having fuller stadiums, right? You can imagine, even if, for example, it could also be advantageous not to just have more revenue, but if I sell more tickets, right? Here I was only selling one ticket, here I was selling two, right? So having fuller stadiums might be good for things like ad revenue, or might be good for things like, the conference of the league being able to sell their games at a higher price. And so there might be revenue streams outside of the ticket market that it's good not to just increase your ticket revenue, but also increase the number of tickets you sell, right? Having a fuller stadium. Okay. I think if that's all I wanted to say, that's all I want to say. Any questions on idea? Yeah.
Do like season tickets go into that?
You're jumping the gun. We'll talk about those in a second, right? That's a slightly different idea, but it's the same idea that you are taking games have a higher marginal benefit for consumers, games that have a lower marginal benefit, and then kind of trying to sell them as one, right? So I'll jump ahead to it since you asked about it. So what we're going to do with season tickets is, have you guys talked about in any of your other econ, have you talked about two-part pricing? Does this sound familiar at all? Probably not. I wouldn't think so. So if we think about the way that season tickets work, it's kind of a different model. So I've got capacity that's way over here. What I'm going to try to do with season tickets is get what we call a representative consumer, right? So I want to know what an individual's demand curve, like the average person that attends my game, what does their demand curve look like? Just theirs, right? Not the whole market, but just theirs. So we know, I guess we don't know this for sure, but I don't think anyone probably has a high enough demand that they would want to buy out the entire stadium, right? So we almost don't have to worry about hitting our capacity constraint. We're just trying to think about, how can I sell these season tickets to my representative consumer, right? And for what price can I do that? So in general, you might think, okay, we'll choose where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. We'll go up to the demand curve and set the price there, right? So let me think of one here. We'll do 100 minus 10Q, okay? So my demand curve starts at 100 and goes down here. Where is it going to hit the x-axis? When I'm at the x-axis, that's at a price of 0. do a little bit of math, and I can figure out this quantity down here is 10. Right? My marginal revenue curve would be twice as steep. So 100 minus 20Q. Same idea there. Where does it hit the x-axis? Set marginal revenue equal to 0, right? Then just solve for that quantity, and here I get the quantity of 5. Okay. So if I'm setting a single price, I could think about this consumer would be willing to pay wherever I'm at a quantity of 5. So I plug in that quantity of 5. 100 minus 10 times 5 is 50. Okay. So if I just want to set a single price across, like, let's say I've got 8 regular season home games. I'd set each one at 50. I know this person would purchase 5 of them. That's what would maximize profit if I was setting a single price for all of those 8 games, right, to this one consumer. If instead I don't use a single price and I think about, okay, I know that this person would be willing to pay up to, or sorry, would be willing to purchase all 10 if the price was 0. Right? But I know that if they purchased all 10 of those tickets, what would their entire marginal benefit be? Well, if they purchase all 10, I know the entire area under the demand curve would represent consumer surplus if the price was 0. So whatever the value of total surplus they'll get, they'll pay up to that amount, right? So instead of thinking about just like each individual ticket, we're thinking about across all of these 10 tickets, how much would this person benefit? So here we've got what? 100 times 10 times 1/2, since it's a triangle, or 500, right? I love that. And like sick investors teaching right next to him. I wish I could talk that loud. So, where was I talking? Oh, so we know the entire value to the consumer is going to be the area under that demand curve. So here we figured out that was 500. So what I would do is take this representative consumer. I know they'll be willing to pay up to 500 if I sell these block of season tickets or for, you know, all 10 tickets or something like that, right? Now in practice, it might be a little bit more difficult because, you know, yeah, I would buy 10 games, but I only have 8 available maybe. And so maybe I do hit my capacity because I can only sell this person, you know, a season ticket. I can only sell them 8, you know, there's only 8 home games. But let's just assume that whatever sport we're looking at, it'd be a high enough number of games to where they would kind of want to purchase all of them. We would determine what the entire benefit to the consumer was. And then from there, we would charge them that exact amount. And then to attend the game, the second price, which is kind of weird, is that it's 0. Once I purchase my season ticket, now if I want to go attend the game, there's no additional cost, right? I just paid this one-time upfront fee. So this idea that we kind of have this fixed fee, setting it equal to whatever total consumer surplus would be, and then a second fee, usually 2-part pricing. I didn't have another price. I'll give you a non-sports example in a second. But here for season tickets, we think of that second price as 0. So a better example of this from like outside of sports where we don't have a price of 0 for that second price would be like if you buy a Costco membership and then you now second price you pay is, you know, you're paying for the however much, whatever you're buying there costs, right? But there's that initial fixed fee because there's a value to being able to purchase just their products that they know that you'd be willing to pay. So 2-part pricing is a little bit trickier outside of these sports examples, but for us, we're just going to kind of focus on the ticket market and how it's used. And that's going to be like this. We charge that first price, which is the fee, exactly set equal to consumer surplus. Second price, we set at 0. Now, if I set the second price at 0, once I pay this upfront fee, we know that people will choose to then attend all those games, right? Unless they have like opportunity costs that pop up that drive them, you know, to maybe not attend one or two, because that, you know, that would still be a cost to them, right? The cost isn't 0 anymore if I, you know, to attend this game have to give up whatever I would make at my job, right? But in general, this is what we can kind of think about for these season tickets. Any questions on that before we keep moving here? Okay, so I skipped over one, which is just this general idea of price discrimination. So I'll give you an example of what this looks like if we could perfectly price discriminate. So instead of an individual consumer, let's say we're focused on market demand for this one game. And we've got, thinking about our ticket market, so we've got our capacity, and then what do I want to make sure I do here? Let's say I've got my demand curve out here. I don't want to set a single price. If I'm able to charge different consumers different prices, the optimal strategy, if I somehow knew exactly what every single consumer's marginal benefit was, so that I could identify the person who is willing to pay this price. And I could identify the person who was willing to pay up to this price. Well, then it'd be better if I could sell exactly equal to that price, because now instead of getting this much lower single price for those games, I'll be getting much higher values, right? So if I can identify those consumers and charge exactly their marginal benefit, the demand curve essentially becomes my marginal revenue curve. Now, where's the optimal kind of, what would the optimal thing to be to do? Not set the price here, but set all these different prices, which would then take what used to be, we think about setting this single price, so I'll call this the single price just to have something here. Before, this entire area would have been consumer surplus, right? Because it's the area above the price they would be paying, but below their demand curve. Well, if I'm able to price discriminate and identify these consumers who are willing to pay more, now I'm charging them exactly how much they benefit. The consumer surplus gets driven down to zero, and all of what was consumer surplus now becomes producer surplus, right? And so now if we think about producer surplus, it used to be the area underneath the price, but above my supply curve. It's just that, remember, our kind of supply curve is just this capacity constraint in the ticket market. So after I'm able to price discriminate, I've turned all of that producer surplus into consumer, or sorry, all of that consumer surplus into producer surplus. Any questions on that? Hopefully you've kind of seen this idea before. So this might sound like a pipe dream, but how do I figure out who these people are who are willing to pay more, right? Well, how do I figure out which consumer is the first person on that demand curve? Well, it's a lot easier for teams now, right? To collect data on everything, right? And so they're able to send either targeted ads, they're able to figure out that people who are purchasing tickets at different times of the day have different characteristics, might be more likely to sell for a higher price. And so they can't do it perfectly, but they are able, and it's, to be honest about how it works, we're not going to look at a model like this because it gets a little bit complicated. But really what they're doing is they can kind of identify the consumers, but usually it's not like I know exactly which consumer has the marginal benefit, but I can identify the group that I know kind of makes up the top portion. So I'll kind of target them with a specific price. Then I kind of know my second group. I can't, perfectly identify everyone there. So I'll set their price there. And then it's like I'm chipping away a little bit and turning some of consumer surplus into producer surplus, but not all of it, because these consumers still get a little bit of surplus from these different prices I'm setting, right? And it's not like explicit. But if I send only targeted ads to students for being able to buy blocks of tickets at certain prices, well, that's essentially what I'm doing. I'm price discriminating, sending multiple prices. Just I can't perfectly price discriminate, turning my entire demand curve to my marginal revenue curve. Let me think if there's anything else I want to mention there. So this is going to be closely related to this idea of what it's probably going to look like in practice if I can't perfectly price discriminate. But what if I'm going to go back to my representative consumer? I keep this easy. Okay. So I can also do something to maximize profits called quantity discount, right? So what we're going to do here is, once again, we think capacity is like way out here. Nobody has a high enough demand to buy out the entire stadium. So we're just going to think about our representative consumer. And we think the representative consumer has this as their demand curve, right? Or their marginal benefit for attending this game, or the number of tickets they would buy. So if I was setting like a single price, right, I would marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. I can kind of set my single price here. And I think we worked through kind of models like this last class. Instead, I can generate a higher amount of profit, and I'll try to give you an idea why. So if we think about producer surplus here, it'd be like this black shaded area if I was able to just set a single price. Right? If instead I said, I'm going to set ticket prices at $90, right? That first ticket you purchase is $90. Well, I know the representative consumer, how much would they be willing to pay for that first ticket? Well, they pay $90, right? I then say, okay, look, if you've purchased one ticket, right? If you buy a second, that second ticket will sell to you at a discounted price, right? The second ticket you purchase, we're actually only going to charge $80. Well, I know that for that second ticket, the person will be willing to pay up to $80. And I say, okay, if you buy a third, I'll sell it to you for $70. Now, that's just based off of kind of my expected or my predicted demand. But if I was able to do that from that first person, I was now able to take all of this as producer surplus, and then all of this as producer surplus. Notice I'm going to be having the same surplus I did before, but adding, converting some of consumer into producer surplus. So if I'm able to have this representative demand curve, estimate it somehow, and then set these quantity discounts, I can actually generate a higher amount of producer surplus or profits if I use this quantity discounting. Okay. So this is usually something you do like going into the season where, you can buy tickets to X number of games. The first ticket you purchase, this price. If you buy a subsequent ticket, it would be this price, right? Questions on that pricing strategy idea? So these are all things that we see, like not every team, every sport, every league, but these are all pricing strategies that are used. And then this one, I really kind of already briefly mentioned this, but we aren't able to perfectly price discriminate, but a lot of times we can use characteristics to identify different consumer groups that we know have different representative demand curves. So the perfect example of this is like students versus regular tickets. They know that the demand curve, the fixed income students are on, the demand curve is going to be much lower. And so we literally just say, okay, based off this characteristic that you have a student ID, you can pay this price. If you don't, you pay this price, right? I'm sure there's a lot of teams also that would do a very similar thing with I'm sure veteran discounts and then things like that. Anytime you think about them giving a discount to a specific group, what you're really doing is you're charging them a different price. That is price discrimination, right? You get 10% off, because you're a student or whatever, well, that's a lower price, right? So these discounts, a lot of times these prices are hidden, the fact that they're different, in calling them things like discount for this group versus that group. Questions on this idea? Okay, so we've talked a lot about monopoly power. It's probably worthwhile to at least mention that a lot of the times, so I think we talked a little bit before about location and why do teams decide to locate where they do? Well, why don't I see two teams in New York, but why don't I see two teams in Indianapolis, right? It's because of the cost structure, whatever the demand is from that city. If a second team were to be added and now it becomes a perfectly competitive market, potentially even then there's not enough demand to support positive profits for multiple teams. What would happen? One of the teams would leave. Now there's enough demand to support that one monopoly. That's the idea of a natural monopoly. Right? So it's worth mentioning the fact that, if we have these significantly high costs, maybe sharing demand, it wouldn't be profitable for two. It's never going to be profitable for two teams in some of these cities based off of their population, income, whatever the demand for that team is. And so that might be why we most cities, unless they are significantly like LA, Chicago, New York, unless we have really, really large cities, we typically only see one. We should probably suggest most teams are actually natural monopolies. And then just kind of like a more general discussion. If we think about it, we should be a little bit careful when we say that like a team has monopoly power and we're thinking about market demand. It probably makes more sense that we're breaking things up down by different types of consumers, right? And then I might have a monopoly from certain fans in my product, but not others. So I've used the example of like, Green Bay, right? So we think about the Packers, they're up in Wisconsin, right? Do they have a monopoly? Well, they don't have a monopoly in, sporting events, right? There's several other teams up in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, where, the basketball and football season overlap, baseball, football season overlap. So maybe nearby, maybe go to the Brewers. So like, no, I don't have monopoly in just the product of a sporting event, right? Now, for some people that want to specifically see an NFL football game, I have a monopoly there. But if I just have a consumer who wants to take their kid to a game, right, or they're just looking for something to do on that day, I may not have a natural monopoly in just sporting events. Well, they go down. What about football games? Well, college football overlaps, and so we actually kind of have some competition there. Maybe people view those as substitutes. They just want to attend a football game on whatever weekend. I might not even have a monopoly in the market for football games. Do I have a market for in-person NFL games? Well, kind of, but not truly, because if someone's solely just interested in going to a professional NFL football game and they don't care about the team, I mean, Chicago's not a terrible drive, like especially after they moved the stadium, right? For a lot of people in Wisconsin, probably easier to get to the stadium than people who live in Chicago. So I don't even have a monopoly in that market. Do I have a monopoly for in-person Green Bay Packer games? Yes, right? I know that for those consumers who it's crucial that they want to watch the game because it's that team, then yeah, I have a monopoly over those people. But there's a lot of consumers like that aren't as interested in maybe, they aren't specifically interested in the Green Bay Packers, and they just want to see a football game, or they just want to see a sporting event game, right? I don't have a monopoly over those consumers. So I want to start to be careful when we think about this monopoly power that I might have it for some consumers and I might not for others. So it becomes, complicates our models. We'd have several demand curves to be thinking about and kind of trying to set the optimal price there. We won't really look at those we won't make these models too complex, but we want to remember that this is kind of going on in the background. We already talked about this as well. Why might monopolies exist? Barriers to entry. So teams, even if you want to locate in the same city, you had to pay, the existing team that you're moving with a certain number of miles of. We see that, teams or leagues will start putting things in contracts about playing for other leagues that they view them as competitors. It's a whole thing right now, I guess, going on between what's the name of the golf thing? Live? Yeah, right. So the idea there is, the PGA wants to make sure they have a monopoly in those events. So they start writing things in the contracts so that players can't play with opposing leagues, right? Because they want to try to guarantee they're keeping that monopoly power. I don't know how often this has happened, but it would make a lot of sense. Someone was talking to me last class at the end. Now I forgot who it was. It might have been you. About the New York team sharing a stadium, or you have the LA team sharing a stadium, right? Well, why do they do that? Right? Even though they're sacrificing some monopoly power, sharing the stadium, at least especially if we go in together to build it, cutting my fixed costs down in half, right? So what might not have been profitable before for me, if I cut my costs in half, it may now be profitable, right? So if someone came to me and said, they proposed that. So let's say the Chicago Cubs and the Chicago White Sox both want to build a new stadium, right? And the White Sox come to the Cubs and say, hey, look, we'll go in half with you on a stadium. We'll get the scheduling with the MLB correctly so that we'll share the same stadium, right? Cut our cost of building this new stadium in half, right? Why might the Cubs reject that, even though it would cut their costs in half?
Your capacity is also kind of
So think about it as we're still playing the same number of games, right? So it's like maybe a better, it's easier to do with the NFL example. So let's say, I don't really have one where there's two teams. Let's say Dallas and Houston decide, well, they're not even in the same location. Let's go with my original example, right? So you've got the two baseball teams. They're going to still play the same number of games. They're just able to like alternate days or something. So they're still going to have the same number of tickets. And let's just assume, just for the sake of this example, that like the new stadium, the capacity is whatever they would have chose if they built their own, right?
There's a lot of like historical value to Wrigley and the tying it.
So we talked about there's some historical value. So for them, it might be more valuable to kind of keep the stadium in its current location, have their own. You can also think about it, if someone comes to me and proposes this, what do I probably know is true? The White Sox are the one that proposed it. What do I probably know is true? They're looking to cut their costs, right? They think that building the stadium on their own, maybe it may not work out for them. Well, if I'm the Chicago Cubs and I think, well, if they can't build a new stadium, or if they build their own, the costs are too high, they actually can't generate enough of profit. I could maybe think I'm driving them out of the market by denying them that, right? And then once they leave the market, right? Once they fizzle out, now I've got a monopoly, right? Now, this probably doesn't happen like within the same league and within two teams, but it's just kind of a thought experiment. What might be more likely is I don't have a monopoly in sporting events. This could be a small city that has minor league baseball, minor league hockey, minor league, whatever teams. And maybe there, instead of, the hockey, minor league hockey and minor league basketball teams sharing a stadium, if I want to guarantee that I have a monopoly in sporting events in that area, maybe if I'm the basketball team, I deny the local minor league hockey team from kind of playing in the same stadium, or kind of agreeing to kind of share that stadium with them.
Mm-hmm. How did this did the Raiders and the A's combine their stadiums because of cut costs back then?
Yeah, so I brought this up thinking about more of teams wanting to keep monopoly power, but the idea that they would share the same facilities because they're cutting their costs in half, it doesn't have to be within the same sport, right? It could be across sports. So it used to be Oakland, Miami used to had that baseball and basketball, or baseball and football games in the same stadium. But I think we'll talk a little bit, not today. Yes, you can cut your costs in half. But why do you think I don't believe there's any that exist, any stadiums that have baseball and football games now, but you see a lot of NHL, NBA teams share a stadium?
Fort Wayne, they're minor league.
Share. Yeah. So why might those two sports be more likely to share a stadium than baseball, football?
Because they have around the same capacity for their games.
Yeah, and if you think about the surface or what they're playing, it's the same shape. You would want the optimal viewing, the stadium would be very similar for NHL and NBA games. It's the same area, right? It's a rectangle, right? If you think about a baseball field, right, versus a football field, you would want two very different stadiums, right, for optimal viewing. So yeah, you can cut your costs in half, but you also might be sacrificing a little bit of demand if I share with a sport that has a wildly different playing surface, or I shouldn't say surface, a playing field. See a hand somewhere.
I know that they play hockey too, the winter league or whatever they do for college, right? They do it's a winter class they do.
So I mean, we could dive into that, where they try to where they took Wrigley and then they set up an outdoor game, which is cool. Yeah. But there it's always trade-offs, right? So yeah, they're choosing to play at this venue that's not really set up optimally to view an NHL game. So what do? They don't just put the NHL game in the middle of Wrigley Field and then tell people to sit in the stands. They bring in temporary stands that they put on the field, right? They want to if they can make it a more optimal viewing experience, then that would be good. But let's say they couldn't. But they know that these outdoor hockey games generates much higher demand. Well, there I'd be gaining some profit by having the game outside, driving up my demand curve, but I might be sacrificing a little bit by playing in a non-optimal viewing stadium. So it's always trade-offs. Yeah. Any other questions or comments on that? Diving into a lot of stuff that I didn't expect. So this is fine. This is good. I think I'm going to skip ahead maybe. because I want to make sure we have enough time to talk about this. So I'll come back to those next class. So one thing that I don't really know if everybody does this in their micro econ course. I do. I'll assume that whoever you had, maybe they didn't do that, but it'll be something we start using when we're talking about players' salaries, right? So just like we can have monopoly power, we can have monopsony power, right? And so monopsony power doesn't like pop up a lot in the real world because a monopolist is a single producer. A monopsonist is someone who's a single consumer, right? So what markets might we see a monopsony exist in, right? Well, if I want to play NFL football, there is one employer. There is one person who is demanding my labor. So I can think about this as I'm looking at my labor market where my quantity is now the quantity of labor. We could look at this at an individual level. We could look at this at a market level. So number of players, number of hours expected from the players. We'll talk a little bit more about the labor market and some of the complexities we have analyzing it later on. But for now, just assume we've got some demand for labor coming from this league or these teams, right? We would then have that individuals would supply their labor, right? So everything kind of flips on its head. The players now are the supply side, and the teams are the ones who are demanding this product, demanding labor from these players. Okay? So a monopsonist, instead of basing kind of their single price off of a twice as steep marginal revenue curve, think about the teams here that are demanding labor. They're the only consumer. The NFL teams are the only ones who are able to, consuming the professional NFL players' labor. So instead of a twice as steep marginal revenue curve, these wages they're paying essentially are kind of their expenditures. So we call this a twice as steep as supply marginal expenditure curve. Okay. So it's like flipping everything on its head, right? For the monopolist, we had a twice as steep marginal revenue curve. Monopsonist, twice as steep marginal expenditure curve, and it's twice as steep as supply. Okay. From there, we kind of treat this like our marginal cost, right? Where would marginal cost hit our marginal revenue? Where the revenue that we're earning kind of now is, right? I'm charging consumers their benefits. So my marginal revenue curve is essentially like my demand curve. So I can think about where does marginal expenditure hit my demand curve? This is the quantity that the monopsonist would want to set. At that quantity, they know workers are willing to play for, right? Whatever amount of games or whatever amount of labor hours this is, they'd be willing to play for wherever they're at on their supply curve. So what I do is I then go down to that supply curve, just like with a monopolist, we went up to the demand curve, and they'll charge this lower wage, right? Now notice if this like monopsony power didn't exist, well then my equilibrium point will be out here. A higher wage, higher number of labor hours, or a number of workers, however you want to think about this. But this monopsony power, if the league has some monopsony power over its players, it's going to result in lower player salaries, right? And that's byproduct of they're trying to maximize profits and in doing so kind of minimizing their marginal expenditures on player salaries. Any questions over that idea? So this is a problem. Right. I mean, I guess it's not necessarily a problem for the teams, but it's a problem for the players, right? Because they know that they could be getting paid a higher wage, right? If that monopsony power didn't exist. Okay. So lower quantity, lower price, or lower wage paid to the players as a result of this monopsonist. Back in the day, we had a really good way of analyzing this. We can still think about them probably having some monopsony power, but teams can compete with each other. So that should help alleviate this, right? If I say, well, there's only one employer of NFL football players. Well, not really, right? There's more than one team. So maybe that monopsony power gets eliminated. But they used to have in Major League Baseball something called reserve clause, which meant that the team had the rights to the player, which meant that that player couldn't just go sign with somebody else. The only way they could get, on another team is if they were traded, right? They're trading the rights to the player. When that was the case, well, then, yeah, whatever team I'm with has monopsony power. They're the only employer unless they decide they don't want to be, right? So, go down here, talk a little bit just about the history. So we had this reserve clause, which created monopsony power for these teams. So I think the kind of catalyst was this Kurt Flood case. So he's a black player and he got traded to the Phillies, right? So similarly, like if the team has the rights to you and they trade you away, you now have to play in that city or you can't play anywhere else, right? So we got traded to the Phillies. Philadelphia may have had a reputation for not being the kindest place to live if you were a non-white individual. And so he's like, yeah, I don't want to go live and play there. All right, that's not where I want to be. I took this all the way to the federal court, but still lost. Right. So these players, in most cases, if can you imagine like if unless you sign like a non-compete or something like that, like once an employer, I can quit and go work another job within the same industry, like anywhere, right? This doesn't really exist outside of sports. So here we have this monopsony power and the court still like sides with the teams, right? Doesn't side with the individuals here. So it takes another 5 years. This guy stepped in, Marvin Miller. And basically he realized that if they wanted to get things changed, because there was this one employer, right, that we need to combat monopsony power with monopoly power, right? That we need to become the only supplier of labor and we need to unionize, right? So just like the monopsony lowered the wage, we can think about what if I was able to unionize and set a single wage, right? And it isn't that like in practice isn't setting like a single wage, but it's setting like different characteristics that allow wages to be higher for different quality players. And so if I unionize, I now become, if you want to employ someone to play NBA basketball, you're hiring a player that belongs to the NBA players union, right? And so there is one supplier of labor, so that once you unionize, the players essentially become a monopoly. They would set the quantity here and tell teams, we know that you'd be willing to pay up to whatever wage that is, right? So we have this reserve clause, created monopsony power. So what happened as a result? Courts and stuff wouldn't help the players out, so eventually they are able to unionize and combat some of those lower wages paid by the monopsonists to higher wages because they now have monopoly power. And in practice, if we have both of these existing at the same time, what happened? Well, now there's like a range of wages that will come to an agreement somewhere in that range, right? We can't say exactly what the wage will be if both of these exist, but we know we'll be somewhere in that range. I think there's anything else I want to say on this. So you would work through a labor market example very similar to how we did with the equations last class with our monopoly example. It'd be very similar from a monopsonist. The only difference is going to be you'll have like some supply curve. And then your marginal expenditure starts at the same place, but twice as steep. And then we would kind of solve the monopsony model, basically just the exact opposite of how we do with the monopoly model. But we could do that using some of these linear kind of equations as well. Okay. So before we get out of here, I'll give everybody just credit for showing up today. So we'll have some questions over the weekly reading next class. It's the one that's on there. It says like weekly or week 4 reading. And then I'll show you a little bit of stuff, I think, in Excel on Friday that should help you as I start to get some of the data out to you, reviewing how we do regressions in Excel, doing a little more of interpretation of results that we get from Excel, but kind of tying that into the discussion that we'll have about that paper. Okay? Any questions for me before you out of here? Oh, also, I'm just losing my mind. Did I not mention at the beginning of class? Instead of 2 to 4 today, I have a meeting that popped up. So my office hours, I'll be there from 2 to 3 and then 3 to 5. If you want to stop by, I know that you're working on that homework and have any questions on that. Otherwise, I'll be around tomorrow 2 to 4 during my normal office hours. Okay.
You said 2 to 3 and 3 to 5.
Sorry, 2 to 3 and 4 to 5. Yeah.
I'll come by at 4 for the projects.
Okay.
You might something.
Oh yeah. Yeah, either one's fine. Hold on, remind me the topic.
The first one had to do with the farm system and see if we could find data for that, because he found it.
Oh, yeah, farms, okay. Sorry, I was looking for multiple people, so
It's all good.
so, yeah, I don't know, I would think I would maybe go that route and trying to like understand the impact that it has on the team's quality first.
Okay.
And then from there, so like the number of wins they get, how it's impacted by how many drafted players they had.
Yeah.
Because there's no real way of like, at least from the data sources I'm aware and I found, I can really only define whether or not they're in my farm system or pick that up if I know I draft. Like,
Yeah.
so I can't identify people I traded for, and then yeah, and I mean, I'm sure there could exist a data set that has like minor league player statistics and then maybe matching up on the name, but it'd be hard, and I'm not sure. I don't know if it exists for the minor. I don't even know where that is for the minor league players. But yeah, you could do something with that and try to look at how that impacts the wins they see. But also you should be able to do something with could probably get you some team revenue level data as well.
Okay.
So yeah,
I'll come back for them either way.
Okay.
So I'll see you later.
Yep.
Could you reopen the IQ thing?
Oh, hold on.
Sorry.
It's like the exact same. Like what I was thinking about.
Oh, I don't know if I got you. Were you trying to
Yeah.
get your name recorded?
Yeah.
Here, try to hit it again. Still showing 0. There we go.
Thank you.
Now, when I initially upload that, I have the way